All right, well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in once again. Today we're going to be talking about the latest on what is a pretty wild day 2 forecast and a pretty interesting Monday it's looking to shape up to be for April 27th across much of the central United States, including a large swath of Illinois, portions of Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, and even as far north as Wisconsin. We're going to be breaking down the setup for this event and also talking about where the uncertainty lies. There's a lot of that right now, and you've probably seen that on social media and from your favorite meteorologists out there, myself included. We're going to dissect why that is, what's causing that uncertainty in the models, and then try to break down timing of some of these worst storms for all of you. So if you know anybody that lives in these areas highlighted in the orange or even yellow colors, be sure to share this video with them, as we're going to provide a full breakdown on this severe weather potential. And also be sure to like and subscribe as well, as that helps out the channel a lot. And if you have any questions, be sure to post those down in the comments below. The time of this video is going to be likely Sunday evening when you see this, so certainly a lot can change between the time that you're watching this. So if you do have any questions, be sure to post those down in the chat below, and I'll be sure to answer those. For those that don't know, my name is Brendan. I'm a degreed meteorologist, and I provide this content as just an interest of mine and to share my knowledge with all of you and to help you be informed for when severe weather strikes your area. In our channel, we're going to be talking not just about severe weather, but we'll also be uploading videos as it relates to flooding potential, wildfires, hurricanes, as well as winter weather. So like I said, if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do so and hit that bell icon, as you'll get notifications on when I go live and post videos. So let's talk about the day 2. We're going to skip today's severe weather threat because that's already ongoing. The one that I'm pretty concerned about is tomorrow. And like I said at the top of the video, it's mostly encompassing portions of the lower Great Lakes, but then extending as far south as, we'll say, Jonesboro, Arkansas, and even now towards Little Rock, and as far north as Madison. So pretty wide area of severe weather potential. But not just that, but a lot of people are impacted. We're talking about metros like St. Louis, Chicago, even parts of, actually all of Milwaukee, and then Indianapolis, to name a few. A lot of people are under the threat for severe weather. And so if we break this down, current probabilities, we'll start first with tornado. We have a 10% chance of a significant tornado impacting anywhere in the yellow within 25 miles of a point. Now, just to clarify, we are talking about 25 miles from wherever you are in this yellow. For example, if I was, say, in Peoria, right here, there is a 10% chance, statistically, of a tornado impacting somewhere within a 25-mile radius of any given point. So that's a really clear distinction I want to make at the top of this conversation. We're not saying a 10% chance of a significant tornado to hit Peoria necessarily, but that it would hit somewhere within any given point of this yellow highlighted hatched. So 25 miles within that point. Nonetheless, 10% is a pretty high probability for tornadoes, and that is encompassing the Quad Cities, so you're under the gun, but even going as far south as central and parts of southern Illinois. And by the way, at the time of this video, this is the latest SPC outlook. I do expect for the tornado threat to actually be cut off a little bit further south. So the higher probabilities, this 10%, probably going a little bit further south into this area, right? And even parts of Paducah could even get into that 10%. Again, I'm not the Storm Prediction Center, but I will say that the trends continue to shift further and further south. I'm not really having a lot of confidence in the Davenport Quad Cities area. Nonetheless, there still exists the potential for tornadoes. The greatest probability of tornadoes will likely be south of Interstate 80, so places like Peoria, Bloomington Normal, Springfield, Quincy, St. Louis, Litchfield. So pay close attention to that. Again, it'll be interesting to see what the Storm Prediction Center does, and of course, you'll want to pay attention to the latest outlooks from them, as well as the National Weather Service for the latest information. But that's how it stands today. If we take a look at the hail threat, this is a funny one. We got a 30% chance that extends from the Quad Cities all the way down through what looks to be Jefferson City, Missouri, even parts of Springfield, Missouri, and then, again, just a very fringes of northern Arkansas. And there is the potential for some pretty large hail. Honestly, I would only expect that with storms that are more discrete. We'll talk more about that here in a bit. If these storms come in a little bit more linear, so more in this kind of line along a front, as you can see by this pink line, that's where I start to get a little bit more hesitant on the hail threat, and I would lean more towards a damaging wind tornado threat. And that's typically because when you get a storm line to form, or a quasi-linear convective system, for lack of a better term, those lines of thunderstorms tend to be more outflow dominant, meaning that they tend to be more linear and they are pushing out cold air. And when you have storms that are outflow dominant, you don't really give them the opportunity to produce really vigorous updrafts because they're all kind of congealing and growing up scale. And so that's why you get kind of a lesser probability of hail in that instance and more of the threat for damaging winds and tornadoes. It still is up in the air, but that is something to think about as we go into tomorrow. And then finally, the wind threat. I am very bullish on this wind threat. And as a matter of fact, the SPC is too. It has a 45% chance pretty much covering the entire state of Illinois once again, following that enhanced risk as we saw here on the day 2 categorical. And that goes all the way down into St. Louis and then as far south as Jonesboro, Arkansas. Now, I'm very bullish on this because even if we don't see a lot of discrete supercells that develop, if we're still looking at a line of thunderstorms, that's going to be bringing a front with it. And when you're all frontal at that point with the strong winds aloft, that's going to promote some pretty damaging winds that eventually transcend to the surface. So I'm actually pretty confident that in the best case scenario, we only see damaging winds. But those winds could be destructive, anywhere between 70 to 80 miles per hour straight line wind potential. So certainly something to keep in mind. But let's actually go ahead and, since we talked about the outlook, let's break down exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because there's a lot to really unpack with this event. And I think what's important to start with is the Null School Earth website. This is really, really great resource because what it does is it shows you the current state of affairs in the atmosphere, right? So what our jet stream is doing. What is our low-level jet doing? Where is our fronts? Where is our low-pressure systems even, right? You can do a lot with this product. And so we're going to just look at a couple of different viewpoints here. And the first one is going to be looking at the jet stream, so our 500 millibar height. So we got a couple things happening at the moment that are going to be the primary drivers for our event. The first one is we have a closed low in the mid-levels across Saskatchewan and Alberta. This is critical because, as we know, low pressures spin counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. That counterclockwise motion, that forcing, is helping to then steer what we call our Pacific jet. I almost said specific. It can be a tongue twister sometimes. But this is our Pacific jet, or what we sometimes call our tropical jet. And so that closed low is helping to steer that tropical air from the Pacific Ocean into the plains. And so this jet stream is ultimately then going to continue to progress over the Rockies, as we see right now, by the time we get to tonight. And so when you have a jet stream like that move over the Rockies, you then get what's called lee cyclogenesis. What lee cyclogenesis is essentially a low pressure that forms on the lee side of the Rockies. And you get that because air is moving on the windward side and being forced up, and then that air sinks as it goes down the leeward side, and that's how you get low pressure development. So we're actually going to see in real time, beginning tonight, a low pressure begin to form somewhere within the Rockies, and then eventually get pushed by this jet stream overnight and into tomorrow morning. As it does this, that low pressure is expected to move northeast into the upper Midwest, and as it does so, it's expected to then deepen or strengthen and really tighten up. And that is going to essentially help to create a frontal boundary, both a warm front and a cold front, by the time we get to tomorrow morning and into the afternoon. which those features will be what helps to drive additional severe weather development. But there's one other piece that's really important to mention, and that is we have a dry line. Now, you're not going to be able to see the dry line here, but if we were to look at the low-level jet, which if we click here at 850, you can see that as we get closer into the plains, you see this Gulf moisture that's being advected northward, but then you also have southwesterly flow moving across Texas. So if we were to actually draw this out, our dry line is going to be right now somewhere within the Red River Valley of Texas and Oklahoma. And so we have moisture that is meeting up with that southwesterly flow. And so once we get a frontal boundary to form with the low pressure out here in the Rockies, that is going to actually force the dry line east. So as a result of that, you'll see here on the models in a little bit, we ultimately end up with a low pressure system up here in the upper Midwest. We get a warm front to set up somewhere just north of Madison, a cold front to trail behind, and then a dry line towards the middle. So, this is what we tend to call a triple point setup. We have 3 different boundaries we're working with, all of which are going to cause a lot of forcing in the atmosphere and help to be conducive for additional thunderstorm development by the time we get to Monday afternoon, particularly beginning with probably northern Missouri, maybe even southern Iowa, and eventually pushing through central Illinois and southern Illinois. So that is the setup, pretty much in a nutshell. And if we head on over to COD, you can actually see on satellite that dry line right now as of this evening, Sunday evening. And as a result, if you go a little bit closer, this is actually really cool to point out here, because I think this demonstrates what I mentioned quite well, is you have your dry line. Okay, so here's your dry line here. You then have your moisture represented by these rolling cumulus clouds that are being advected northward from the Gulf into portions of eastern and central Oklahoma. And then, from that, you get these winds to eventually meet up. So once these southerly winds meet up with your dry line, you get storms to form, as you see here right on the Red River, just east of the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle. So this is a classic example of a dry line in action and eventually meeting with that moisture. And then here's your southwesterly winds coming off there, the plateaus of New Mexico and even portions of southeastern Colorado. So this mechanism that we're watching tonight is ultimately going to be what eventually makes its way into central Missouri by the time we get to tomorrow morning and afternoon. So if we take a look at the models, it has been incredibly uncertain, right? And that is the biggest piece of tonight's discussion. So if we start first here with the HRRR-21Z, we'll take a look at the earlier runs of the 18. And by the way, the HRRR is one of our short-range models that helps us better understand what the storm mode could look like tomorrow for these areas. And so it's not the silver bullet, it's not the end-all be-all model, but it certainly is one that we do rely on and we do take a look at to help us understand what the setup could look like. So if we go back here to, like I said, a few runs ago, and we just look at the convection and the storms initiating, the HRRR hints, and I shouldn't say hints anymore because these storms have now fired over eastern Kansas, but it is showing storms really begin to grow upscale by the time we get to later on this evening. And then as that pushes eastward, you see a lot of shower activity happening across Illinois and parts of northern Missouri. That is a very big question mark and could have significant impacts on what we see into Monday late afternoon into the evening, which is our primary threat. You can see that as we go through the morning and mid-afternoon across a lot of these areas, you see this training convection that happens across, again, same areas right around St. Louis, north central Missouri, and south central Illinois, right along the I-64 and I-70 corridors. And that takes us well into the afternoon. But then, look at this. You see that convection begin to fire off. Additional rounds of showers and thunderstorms across the Quad Cities and just to the northwest of St. Louis. And that's because that dry air we talked about, that southwesterly flow, really begins to kick up as that cold front pushes through. And that helps to clear out any shower and thunderstorms that were lingering throughout the morning tomorrow. Now, here's the thing. The models at the moment are not having a good handle on tonight's convection. And that's important because if we were to draw out scenarios here, it's a couple things. It's really two scenarios. Scenario number one is we get something like the HRRR is showing, which is just training showers and thunderstorms, which would essentially help to stabilize the environment and prevent anything more than a line of showers and thunderstorms intensifying and firing off later on in the afternoon. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two would be if we don't see these storms make it into the evening and they just kind of die off. If that was to happen and we get a lot of clearing, then we go from this linear storm mode that you can see across St. Louis and the Quad Cities to more of a discrete to semi-discrete threat. So in other words, the two scenarios are this. Scenario number one, we get thunderstorms to just continue to train throughout the night. We get a ton of rain, anywhere between 1 inch to 3 inches in many spots. And then, stabilizes the environment, and then we wait for that front to swing through where the threat then would be mostly damaging winds and tornadoes. Scenario number two would be what the RRFS is showing, which let's see if it's showing on this run. It might not be. Yeah, here we go. Scenario number two would be that these storms really don't make it into Illinois and Missouri, and they kind of die off, and they stay mostly west throughout the morning and afternoon, and then boom, we get all these little supercells to fire up. Let's go ahead and actually zoom in here a second. And as you can see, right, that's scenario number two. You get all this clearing to happen because there wasn't much convection to stabilize the atmosphere in Illinois. There wasn't a lot of rain and thunderstorms to cool things down. And instead, you get more supercells, all these little supercells to fire off across Missouri and then eventually race into Illinois. This would be the worst case scenario because at that point, the environment is conducive for not just strong tornadoes, but ones that are long track and violent and that could span for tens of miles. So, I should say last for tens of miles. So if there is a best case scenario, it would be scenario one, as we showed on the other run, where we get more of this linear convection along the front when the cold front and the dry line swing through, and that would be more of a damaging wind and conditional tornado threat. Whereas this scenario, where a lot of that thunderstorm and shower activity that's across Kansas and Oklahoma tonight, that dies off and decays by the time it gets to these areas of concern in Illinois and Missouri Monday morning and Monday afternoon. At that point, you're talking about supercells undoubtedly developing across this area. And if that was to happen, and we see that tonight, then there is not a single doubt in my mind that the Storm Prediction Center wouldn't pull a moderate risk. They certainly would, and I do anticipate that if all comes to fruition. So you can certainly tell that was just two of the several convective allowing models that we have available to us, but this really underscores the uncertainty that exists as of this evening. So I would say that as we just kind of summarize and close out this discussion tonight, anywhere within, we'll say, central Illinois, we'll say St. Louis, and southern Illinois. I kind of drew the box. Let's actually redraw it again here. So let's see. Let me fix that. Oop. Okay. So central Illinois, I'm really concerned about. If there's one area that I'm really watching, either way you look at it, is going to be anywhere south of Interstate 80 between, we'll say, Paducah and as far north as, we'll say, Peoria, Bloomington, Normal. So this box is the area that I'm very concerned about for the potential for significant severe weather. And of course, the ceiling can be a lot higher if we see shower and thunderstorm activity die off later into the overnight, into tomorrow morning. That's when we have to have more of a conversation about an all hazards severe weather threat for discrete to semi-discrete supercells to develop pretty much right along the boundary or just ahead of it in north central Missouri, and actually along the dry line, I should say, north central Missouri, and then eventually into Illinois. So, like I said, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to like and subscribe. And of course, please, if you have any questions that I can help to answer and help to maybe clarify and elaborate, post those down in the chat below, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you. Thank you so much, and we will talk soon. Stay safe.